our panel today. My name is Fernando Pasquel, and I serve as Arcadis National Director for Stormwater and Watershed Management. While there are inspiring examples of watershed-based stormwater planning nationwide, the latest National MS4 Needs Assessment Survey, prepared by the Water Environment Federation, reveals a gap. Only 52% of the respondents have a stormwater plan in place, and just 8% have a stormwater resilience plan. So that's why we are here today, to hear from leading experts who have developed and implemented successful stormwater master plans, leverage innovative tools for resilience and flood risk management, and I think perhaps more importantly, they have measured the real-world impacts of their stormwater programs and flood mitigation strategies. So our first topic is stormwater master planning and implementation. For that, I would like to introduce Craig Carinci. He is the Flood Risk Reduction Land Acquisition Program Director. I have known Craig for many years and have admired his work. He's going to tell us about the drivers for their planning process, the process that they use, and also the lessons learned. Craig?
Thank you, Fernando, and good morning, everybody. Just a little background on Fairfax County for those of you that aren't familiar with our community. We're a land area of 400 square miles located about 15 miles west of Washington, D.C., with a population of roughly 1.2 million people. We are also home to George Mason University, George Washington's home at Mount Vernon, and numerous other historic sites. We have the 12th largest public school system in the country, 30 watersheds and 750 miles of perennial streams that flow either directly to the Potomac River to the east or the Occoquan River to the west. Our watersheds vary in size from about 2 square miles to 58 square miles. We are a MS4 Phase 1 community, and our stormwater program is funded through a countywide stormwater service district that is based on assessed property value and currently generates roughly $109 million a year. A little background on what drove the development of our watershed management plans. Well after World War II and through the early 1990s, the county experienced significant areas of annual growth with a population somewhere between 50 and 60,000 in 1945 to over 800,000 in 1990 and almost 1 million by the year 2000. During this period, the county underwent a significant land use change, primarily from agriculture to intensely developed suburban residential and commercial. Locally, there was community pressure to address the impacts that development was having on our streams, the environment, and the community. And in particular, greater emphasis to improve stormwater quality was being pursued in addition to water quantity and flood mitigation by both the public and through our MS4 permit. The poor health of the Chesapeake Bay had become a regional concern and resulted in state commitments to help restore this resource. Unfortunately, those commitments are being passed down to local jurisdictions, adding pressure to develop strategies and a plan, plan to comply with these impending requirements. In addition, the 1970s master drainage plans for the county were more than 20 years old and focused primarily on flooding and community drainage issues, and not necessarily water quality or restoring and protecting our streams. So with all this pressure and our elected officials' desire to understand and improve the environment, they supported the development of our first step of watershed planning and what we called the Stream Protection Strategies, or SPS. So between 1999 and 2001, we performed a baseline biological, chemical, and physical assessment of 114 sites, which served really as a snapshot for countywide conditions. The SPS also recommended that a more detailed physical assessment of all 750 miles of streams be performed. The data from this, what we called the Stream Physical Assessment, or SPA, was completed in 2003, and this would serve to help develop our watershed management plans that prioritize sub-watersheds for protection and restoration, projects, policy recommendations, and the funding that would be needed to improve the health of county streams. So between 2003 and 2011, the county developed and completed 13 watershed management plan documents for all 30 watersheds in the county. The development of our actual watershed management plans was performed in 2 distinct rounds, with roughly 1/2 the county being completed in each round. The first round is shown in green on the map that you're looking at now. In general, our watershed management planning process consisted of the following steps: characterizing the watershed by reviewing and synthesizing previous information from our 1970s master drainage plans, SPS and SPA. Holding community meetings and forming a watershed advisory group for each plan to gain input, provide education, and build community support for the plans. Evaluating current and future watershed conditions, stormwater runoff, and other impacts from present and ultimate development conditions. Developing a list of non-structural and structural watershed improvement projects, including the development of preliminary cost estimates for the highest priority projects. And lastly, obtaining adoption of our final watershed management plans by our elected County Board of Supervisors. Some of the lessons learned and challenges that we learned through this process include, these watershed management plans really help to serve as one of the pillars for the approval of the dedicated funding source for our stormwater program that I mentioned earlier. Before you begin drafting a plan, and what we learned from the first round was to establish well-defined goals, objectives, consistent standards for your plans, including the plan format, modeling, and ranking and prioritization criteria. Resident input was critical. Engaging the community early and the establishment of a watershed advisory group for each plan was essential, not only for the plan input, but also gaining community support for the plan. Meetings and communication with residents also served as an important venue to manage expectations. And although it goes without saying, a holistic approach to watershed management should include all 3 solution types to be effective: projects done by the government, programs to support the residents, and regulatory and policy changes that are needed to result in a healthy and sustainable watershed. This means that the public must also share part of the burden for mitigating human impacts to watersheds. If you're going to invest a significant funding to develop your watershed management plans, it is recommended to spend the time and acquire the funding and resources that are needed to develop and implement an iterative, ongoing process that keeps the comprehensive watershed management plans up to date as conditions change and new information becomes available. Regulatory changes such as TMDLs can dramatically alter the direction of your planning efforts, and where limited stormwater resources must be utilized. In our case, the Chesapeake Bay TMDL significantly changed the direction and focus of our capital improvement efforts. Implement an ongoing communication process with residents. Keep them informed and engaged. Managing expectations through this process builds stronger ties, confidence, and support for ongoing and future work. This is also an important component in keeping decision makers properly informed and convinced that watershed investment is an important public responsibility in order to maintain their continued commitment and support for the program, such that they would be willing to provide the funding and even raise taxes and fees when necessary, especially when state and federal support is waning. And that concludes my presentation. If we have any time, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you, Craig. Really good lessons learned, a good approach on how the county did, starting with the stream protection strategy. All of you that are attending, hopefully you got some good ideas. Please feel free to add, there's a Q&A button in there that you can start putting the questions in there. We're going to move on now to our second speaker, and then we'll have a couple of minutes for Q&A, and then we'll also have, as you saw in the agenda, a lot of time at the end for Q&A. Our second speaker, excuse me, is Andrew Parker. Andrew is the city administrator with Dalton, Georgia. He's going to tell us about implementation, how to put things in place, and also the use of innovative practices to address flooding. Andrew?
Thank you, Fernando. It's a pleasure to be here today and to share some of the lessons learned from Dalton, Georgia. So just to give you some background, I'm a civil engineer, formerly the public works director for the city of Dalton, and now city administrator. So I hope to be able to offer some insight into not only the technical side of things, but the public policy side, which is now my vantage point in this position. Just for some insight, and if we can toggle the Google Earth, I'll share a little bit about Dalton, Georgia. So we're located in Northwest Georgia, about 90 miles north of Atlanta and about 30 miles south of Chattanooga, Tennessee. We're located, as you can see on the graphic there, in the Ridge and Valley topography section of Appalachia. We're a very old city, 175 plus years old. So that means, as you all know, we've got a lot of development, a lot of impervious area. Being in Appalachia, the foothills, we also have a lot of high velocity runoff from the ridges, and water sits in the valleys, creating a lot of flooding issues and a lot of stream bank degradation. We began a relationship with Arcadis when I was public works director to help develop what we call our 21st century stormwater master plan and a flood abatement plan that at the end of the day provided a list of project recommendations for our community to pursue to address some of these longstanding challenges. One of those 30 projects that I want to highlight today is what we call the Walnut North Drainage Basin Improvements Project. This was about a 210-acre watershed, and it was one of our most problematic flood-prone areas in the city. We were dealing with a lot of repeated property damage to residential areas, really frustrated residents, and really no long lasting solutions that had been offered in the past. If we'll continue to advance through the slide, we'll look at some of the phases of that project. So in coordination with Arcadis, this project was a 4-phase project that was really trying to avoid a piecemealed approach that the city had kind of taken in the past to address some of our longstanding challenges. We stepped back and looked at the problem on a basin-wide scale. And the project is really neat because it combined traditional capacity upgrades and stormwater detention, but with also newer approaches like regenerative stormwater conveyance and stream bank restoration, which were new concepts for the city. And what really made the project unique is the fact that it involved both city property, property within the city right of way, but also private property. So it was complex, but it gave us the ability to solve the problems in a comprehensive way. So as we navigate through Google Earth, you see that the upper reaches of the drainage basin are located in a city-owned cemetery. It's about 100 acres itself of surface waters that come down through the drainage basin that you see there in orange. We were able to implement, as part of the first phase of the project, a regenerative stormwater conveyance, which to our knowledge, I believe was a first in Georgia. That was not a project concept that was really proven in the South, and particularly in Georgia. We were able to implement the RSC system combined with detention basin improvements, as you see in the photo on the right. If you'll navigate that next photo, you can see what the pre-existing conditions look like. So a lot of traditional methods of check dams and things like that, which were just not working as it related to flood attenuation and stream bank quality. So if we'll continue to advance through the slides. As I mentioned earlier, the project also involved traditional gray infrastructure improvements with some capacity upgrades and redundancy. And you can see we had some pretty major challenges navigating this residential area, which was a historic district, a residential historic district with some very deep cuts. These were in places, this pipe had to be installed at 16 feet below the surface of the road. And if we'll continue going, you can see we added elements to the project based on feedback from our residents to not only implement the project, but do it in a way that was aesthetic and pleasing to the stakeholders in the area, given the fact that many of our residents use the cemetery as a park, and it was also within a historic subdivision. And as we navigate to the next slide, you can see that the project continued downstream and culminated with the city's first design build stream bank restoration, which turned out wonderfully, as you can see in the picture. And if you'll navigate to the next photo, you'll see the pre-existing conditions with a lot of sediment. And so I'll wrap up by saying, Dalton, of the panelists on the presentation today, we're certainly a a much smaller city, but what I would share is these concepts are scalable. So regardless if you're a small community or a very urban, large community, I think the projects and the methods for success, starting with a master plan, are key to moving forward. And these concepts are scalable regardless of the size of your community.
Great. Thank you very much, Andrew, for the presentation and showing us how you can implement innovations and make a difference in terms of how the community sees it. A quick question for both of you. What do you see as the future of stormwater planning and the implementation or design of some of these facilities? What do you think can be done differently if you will be starting from scratch with all this great experience and probably with more hair, like in my case? What will you do differently?
Well, I'm happy to go first, if that's okay. So
Sure.
I think the future involves both a blend of gray and green infrastructure, nature-based solutions where appropriate. You know, I had a change in perspective as we began to implement some of the nature-based solutions. I, like probably most engineers, were trained that more concrete, more steel, and more asphalt would solve all the world's problems as it related to these issues. But what we've already begun to see here in Dalton with some of these nature-based solutions is they are more effective. They're more effective in attenuating flows, improving water quality as it relates to stormwater. And even without the empirical data, we've already begun to observe that. What I would also say is each project is unique. There's never a one-size-fits-all solution to some of our biggest challenges. And what I would say is that, you know, it's great to have a balanced design with stakeholder feedback and not just rely on a model, right? Because a model is going to give us some recommendations, but to really take a much higher perspective look at it and really balance both engineer recommendations, stakeholder feedback, and use nature-based solutions when you can.
That's so cool. Craig, any thoughts?
Yeah, and I would agree 100% with what Andrew's saying. I would also add that I think some of our planning efforts need to be more realistic. And one of the things that we found, and developing a plan that is flexible in the future, as we learned in the development of our plans, you know, a TMDL can switch your whole planning, or TMDLs can switch your whole planning efforts to another direction that you weren't anticipating. And so you've got to be flexible enough that you can, your plan is, can change based on new information, new requirements, et cetera. The other important point that Andrew made was engaging the residents, keeping them engaged in the process, because they can be a real advocate for your plan as you're going forward to get additional commitments from, you know, your decision makers. So having a plan and a process that you keep your residents engaged in the process, and they also provide a lot of input. You know, they live right next to these streams and facilities, and really feel the impact of stormwater greater than you and I, you know, as they live it, and you can really utilize that input to affect the overall performance of your planning efforts.
Yeah, they receive the impact, but also the benefits of stormwater, right? That's the cool thing about the stormwater management, is the benefits that we provide to the community. So Donna is going to do now a quick poll for the audience. So if you guys can, you all can please respond to these questions. What do you think is the biggest challenge in developing a stormwater or watershed master plans? You can click in there. What are the key challenge? What's the top challenge for you? And click submit, please. Yeah, funding is definitely a big issue, as we have seen it. And there was also in the web survey that I mentioned, is also one of those, the either top 2 or top 3 challenges, the lack of funding. Great. With that, we'll continue with topic number 2. Mike?
Great. Thank you, Fernando. And for our next panelist, CJ Bodner from the city of Portsmouth, Virginia, will be talking to us about resilience and flood risk management. CJ, can you tell us how are communities you've been working with or are familiar with, how are these communities balancing infrastructure upgrades with flood resilience strategies, flood mitigation strategies, and other stormwater protection measures?
Well, one of the things we've been using in the Hampton Roads area, and just so everybody has my background, I am the assistant city engineer for the city of Portsmouth. I've been here 4 months. Before that, I spent 10 years working in the technical services division of the Virginia Beach Stormwater Engineering Center, worked on creating their modeling system and their stormwater master plan. And one of the things we've been trying to do, Mike, with these are use the modeling information that we have to be able to plan moving forward what we need to make for infrastructure improvements. And if we have a project coming up in that area, we want to work on a new roadway, let's use the information we have from the modeling of what needs to be done to go ahead and get that installed at this point in time as part of that project. One of the examples would be in the downtown area of Portsmouth, the Old Town area. If you could advance the slide, please. We've got an area where it's called Dinwiddie Street. Dinwiddie Street goes back to the 1700s when Portsmouth was founded. The elevation on Dinwiddie Street is 2. When you have a tide cycle that can easily get to elevation 2, it can create flooding very rapidly. We have installed tide gates to be able to keep the tide out, but the issue is when you get rainfall, now you still have flooding that can occur. So one of the things we've done with this area is we're actually installing our first stormwater pump station to be able to address the flooding that occurs not just on Dinwiddie Street, but if you'll advance the slide, on Effingham Street also. Like it shows here, this is actually when Hurricane Erin came through a few weeks ago. We didn't really get a whole lot of rainfall from Erin, but the tide did rise to an area where we were experiencing minor flooding throughout the city.
CJ, so where do you see the future stormwater modeling, and particularly some of these digital tools that we've been talking about? Where do you see this going in the future?
Well, I'm going to share my screen real quick. One of the things we've actually created with Arcadis is we've created what we call our climate risk nexus. We're running our stormwater model every hour based on projections of not just the tide from NOAA, but what the future rainfall is going to be from predicted by USGS. And by doing that, we're able to then look at each of our individual basins, our watershed basins, and figure out when are we going to get this rain? We're able to look to see, are we going to experience a flooding issue? I clicked on the Willow Basin there. It's taken a second to open up, but it will show you the projection of not just what has happened over the last 48 hours, but also what's going to happen over the next 5 days in the way of rain. Allows our emergency managed people to be able to know, hey, if this street's going to flood, then we know we need to plan other ways to get into that neighborhood. We also have 2 different additional maps that just show kind of a rainfall forecast, not just for what's happened over the last 2 days, what's going to happen over the next 18 hours, but what will happen over the next 5 days to be able to predict what's going to go on. We then are able to take that information and run it through our model. Like I said, we're running this every hour, and it'll show us where we're going to anticipate flooding to occur. We have some of our areas that are areas we typically see flooding occurring. For example, Dinwiddie Street, we're not expected to see any flooding over the next 5 days for Dinwiddie Street, but we are anticipating that we could potentially have some areas where we're going to have to do some action just based off of the boundary conditions at the Elizabeth River. And then we actually put the nodes in here also. This map is not public yet. We're still in the pilot program standpoint. And we can actually go in and look at individual nodes to see what elevation is going to occur at each one of those nodes per the model forecast for the next 5 days. It's a tool that we ultimately want to take public. Virginia Beach has done something when we were there. We created what we called the recurrent flooding indicator map. It actually takes the model runs and shows what's going to happen on a 100-year storm. And then we actually set it up so you could actually look at what's going to happen on a 100-year storm with 1.5 feet of sea level rise, and what's going to happen on a 100-year storm with 3 feet of sea level rise. It provides benefit to our residents so that they would actually be able to look at it and be able to say, hey, I might want to move my car out of the court because the court's going to flood pretty bad during this rain event. When I talk about the 100-year storm, this is also a 100-year storm with increased precipitation. We're doing that with our models also. Because NOAA Atlas 14 dates back to 2004. We all know that NOAA is working on updating that, and it's outdated. So we added 20% in Virginia Beach. We are looking at using the additional 20% in Portsmouth also until such time as Atlas 15 comes out.
Thanks. And this again, digital tools, CJ. This is the future. This is the future of stormwater. Where do you see this is going? It's a lot of predictive modeling, looking into the future. Do you see any other uses for this going forward, other than just emergency response?
Well, the one of the advantages to the modeling is regionally, water doesn't know boundaries. It doesn't know that it fell in Portsmouth, it should stay in Portsmouth. It'll go into Chesapeake, which is our neighboring community to us. So we're able to actually take our model and work with the city of Chesapeake to model port of their system to be able to say, okay, here's where the water is going to go. Here's what's going to happen based on what actually happens to the outfall. So it's actually got a benefit to a region from a regional standpoint to be able to plan larger projects like a Corps of Engineers coastal storm risk management study.
And so you mentioned the regional approach here, CJ, and working with neighboring localities. I guess it kind of gets me into my next question, right? This high speed technology, this digital technology, it's not cheap. And we know a lot of our localities, we saw in our first poll question, funding is a big issue for our localities, our municipalities, our county governments. So how do localities, or how can our localities expect to deal with these challenges of, I guess, the hardware requirements, or simply just the bandwidth requirements to kind of run some of these? How are y'all dealing with the financial implications of growing the stormwater industry digitally?
Well, I see from a modeling standpoint, I could see running those models in the cloud, using the technologies out there to be able to get the models to run faster. Our model, because we're 1/6 of the size of Virginia Beach, our model runs in about an hour. By going into the cloud, we can get that down to about a 15-20 minute time period. When you get to a larger municipality like Virginia Beach, the model of Virginia Beach took, the last time I ran it was 8.5 hours to run the model. So ultimately, you're going to have to find ways to speed this up, and that's not using any 2D in the model. So when you add the 2D elements in, it extends that time. I know John Payne with GKY, who I know is on here. I saw him in the attendees list. He's been using like a Threadripper to be able to create additional ability to make the machines run faster, to be able to use that 2D capability.
Great. Thanks, CJ. And now I think Donna has another interactive poll for us. Donna, if you would bring that up. Okay. And our next interactive poll is, what do you believe is the most effective strategy for flood risk management in urban areas? I'll give you a few minutes to think about that and submit your answers, please. Time to come in. Policy and zoning changes. The planner in my heart feels for you. I'm a planner by trade before I became an engineer. So it looks like policy and zoning changes, or perhaps a blend of green and gray infrastructure, probably are your most effective means for flood mitigation and urban strategies. As and I would tend to go along with that. But our next panelist, Chandra Soleil from Arcadis, is going to be introducing Mickey from the New York City Department of Environmental Protection. They're going to be talking about flood mitigation strategies in urban areas. Chandra?
All right. Thanks, Mike. So I am Chandra Soleil. I'm the U.S. Stormwater Resilience Practice Lead for Arcadis. And I'm just, really happy to be here with Mickey Urasaka today, Senior Director of GI Research and Planning with New York City Department of Environmental Protection, or just DEP. So welcome, Mickey.
Hi, thank
Mickey,
you.
hey, it's great to see you. And I'm really excited to have this opportunity to just chat a little bit about your stormwater resiliency programs and the topic on hand, which is measuring success for flood mitigation. So, going back a couple of years, rewinding a little bit, DEP's Green Infrastructure Program kind of started out as a CSO mitigation driven program. And so, fast forward many years to today, I think that's still kind of at the core of the program. But in recent years, we've seen this kind of shift and this widening out of strategies. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how DEP's green infrastructure programs have kind of evolved in this new phase to incorporate flood mitigation and resiliency while kind of staying true to those core water quality focus goals at the same time.
Yeah, so just to give everyone some background, our agency is the largest water and wastewater utility in the US. And we also have an environmental compliance team that enforces the air code. But our green infrastructure program was started back in 2010 as part of our long-term control plans to improve water quality, as you were mentioning. And, we're in 2025 now, so we have about 15 years of experience of designing and constructing and maintaining green infrastructure systems. And, one of the key things about our green infrastructure program is that it was driven by some limited modeling and some citywide planning early on. And that's kind of the basis for how we're approaching our flood strategy. So, New York City is very big. There's a lot of different pockets, there's a lot of different neighborhoods. And in order to figure out where we were going to put our green infrastructure, we had to turn to our models that represent our sewer network to understand where exactly the combined sewer overflows were happening and where we thought we would be able to deploy green infrastructure to reduce combined sewer overflows. So, if you go to our green infrastructure website, we have a program map there that shows everywhere where we've been able to build green infrastructure. You'll probably observe that most of it was not in Manhattan, which is extremely urban and dense, and there's really very limited space to be able to put something like a distributed nature-based surface solution. But you can see that we have built out tens and thousands of assets around Manhattan, like in the more outer boroughs, Bronx, Queens, and Brooklyn. And, this was really important because those are also the areas where the water is going towards what we called combined sewer sheds. And we identified that a solution such as green infrastructure was really effective at capturing the top of what we're calling the first inch of rainfall and reducing the amount that's going to the sewer system and thereby reaching our watershed. So that was kind of the approach we have for our green infrastructure program. And then fast forward to 2021, so New York City was hit with 2 hurricanes, which had a lot of damage. There were some tragic deaths, and this led to a wider recognition that more intense rainfalls are coming to New York City, and we need to shift our programs to become more resilient. And so, similar to some other speakers today, we are embracing a layered defense to adapt to the changing weather. And a core component, obviously, is the gray infrastructure to be able to convey all that stormwater. But through our green infrastructure, we're finding that we can build these really fast, and they can complement the gray infrastructure system by removing some of that water or by temporarily detaining it, and it works hand in hand. So we're taking this approach to find areas in the city where green infrastructure will be effective at providing some type of flood mitigation benefits. But that's not to say that we're not also expanding our gray infrastructure as well. And so, as part of our initial focus on CSO, we learned a lot, but we are building upon that model to expand that towards understanding more what the flood risks are across the city.
Yeah, that's great to kind of just see that combined approach kind of evolving. So the subject of our segment really is around measuring success and how we kind of monitor the outcomes. So can you talk a little bit about your approach in evaluating green infrastructure, both, sort of this new flood reduction aspect, but also for water quality and just generally asset condition?
Yeah, so one of the key things that we found early on when we took a deep dive into green infrastructure was that it's really important to know exactly how the water is getting into a nature-based solution and where the water is going. And so a lot of our focus was on understanding how much water was getting in and being able to measure that. We took a lot of water level sensors, soil moisture meters and flow meters coupled with rain gauges to really understand how much water was actually making it to any of our green infrastructure practices and where that water was going. There was a analysis done by some academics a couple years ago for the city, and it really identified that there's a lot of microclimates across New York City, and we can't just use one rain gauge to be able to predict what the flooding is likely going to be at any location. We saw that through our green infrastructure monitoring that one asset in the Bronx would be experiencing very different conditions than one asset in Brooklyn or Queens. Like very local, hyperlocal monitoring seems to be key to getting the full picture of what's happening in the systems. And I think that will translate to being able to measure flooding impacts as well, because any storm that we're going to see is likely going to have different impacts based on where it's hitting and what the hydrology is like in that area and what our sewer system looks like and anything else.
Yeah, you're really hitting on the challenge there because stormwater flooding is so granular and so it changes, within a city based on rainfall, but also on all kinds of things that are occurring in the urban environment. So that kind of takes me into my next question, kind of like future and forward looking. I need to ask the sort of obligatory AI question. AI is changing, kind of everything around us, including stormwater management. So including AI. So sort of what are some of the innovative technologies you're excited about in terms of better answering this, like, measuring success question, and kind of as you continue to advance your programs in this like kind of new era of AI and advanced technology?
Yeah, so I think this goes back to the challenge of being able to identify what's happening in all these remote areas across the city, just because we do know now that conditions can be very different. So one key challenge that we're trying to solve through technology is having remote imaging and being able to analyze that data fast. So any type of computer vision or image recognition and scalable, cheap ways to capture images and being able to see whether there's flooding or any other issues in the area, I think will be key to having a successful program and being able to quantify what's happening.
Well, awesome. Well, we will leave it there. Thank you so much, Mickey, for sharing those insights, and can't wait to see how the program continues to evolve in the future. So now we're going to move into our third and final interactive poll. Don, if you could pop that up on screen. So kind of keeping with what Mickey and I are chatting about, we're just really interested in understanding what folks think about what approach kind of moving forward do you think is most critical for flood risk management and mitigation. So predictive AI, especially modeling tools, IoT sensors for real-time monitoring, advanced spatial analysis, and data-driven policy framework. So I will pick my selection, but go ahead and select your answer as well, and we'll kind of just see how the polling works out. Okay, AI is in the lead, and we've got 40 responses. Yeah, I mean, sort of the the promise of AI is really exciting, as you mentioned, Mickey, with all of the image recognition functions, and the idea, even going back to what CJ was talking about predicting or improving run times through AI H&H models. So data-driven policy frameworks, good to see the policy side getting some love. And then some support for sensing. You talked about that, Mickey, with the need for granular sensors, and then spatial analysis tools as well, just being able to crunch all that data and identify spatial trends and hotspots. Okay, well, we are going to move now into our open Q&A. Feel free to drop questions into the chat. You can hit the 3 dots more button on the top of the screen. And then select Q&A if you want to drop your Q&A or your question into the chat. We'll be happy to try and get to as many as we can in the next 10 minutes here. So I am going to try to. Okay, so we have a question here. Has either speaker had time to go back and put a water quality dollar value to these projects? Obviously, you've had a capital cost. Have you been able to look at what the long-term dollar value of these investments are? That's a really interesting question, and I wonder if we can go to Craig first to see if you might have a reaction on that one.
Yeah, in terms of a dollar value, clearly you've got the cost and the benefits, and that's typically what we are looking at right now, and the extent of how we're evaluating the projects.
Great.
I can add a quick thing, Shandor. In the Chesapeake Bay, we've been implementing some of this bits, so we have a dollar value per pound of phosphorus in terms of water quality. Go ahead. So we have seen some of the innovative stormwater control measures that Andrew talked, the regenerative stormwater conveyance. They are coming in the 15 to around 15,000, 20,000 maximum per pound of phosphorus. Some green infrastructure can be as high as 60, 80,000 per pound of phosphorus. So it all depends on the location. So it's hard to put a dollar value, but I think there is a wide range there.
Yeah, that's a great point. Any of our other panelists want to weigh in on this question? Andrew, maybe?
Well, when I think of cost, I think of public perception more so, as much as I do dollars, right? Because one of the challenges that we had was because the city had very little planning efforts, public lost a lot of trust in government to be able to deliver these solutions to help protect their assets. And it rose to such an issue that it actually played a role in some local elections that we had. We had a mayor who was eventually elected that prioritized this issue, made a commitment to make not only the investment and the capital requirements, but also to change public policy. One point I had hoped to make, and I'll make now, is that, as we all know, stormwater flows do not care about jurisdictional lines, whether that means city, county, public, private property. So it's very difficult to deliver projects only within the confines of city-controlled property to move the needle as it relates to reducing flood risk and eliminating property damage. So from that standpoint, I would just say we have been able to demonstrate that we follow through with our plan, and some of our biggest critics in the past have become some of our greatest ambassadors for the city's future project list.
Yeah, that's great. That's great feedback to really emphasize the community benefits. And I want to move to another question. This one is for CJ in particular. Are you using probabilistic modeling approaches for the Portsmouth predictive modeling? Can you comment on how you're incorporating, I guess, uncertainty into the modeling approach, if that is a piece of the approach?
At this point, we're taking the forecasted models and we're running with what's there every hour. So we are not at this point in time running any type of uncertainty in the model.
Is that an ambition in the future, a future upgrade, future kind of
I've got lots of
thought
ambition,
process?
Shandor, but it all comes down to cost and time.
Yeah.
The time's the biggest aspect. Is it takes a while to build these models. It takes a while to update these models. You want to keep them up to date, because if you don't keep them up to date, then you're looking at something in the past.
Yeah, and the NOAA data kind of infuses a little bit of probabilistic, but it's not there yet.
Another question coming in. You mentioned, I think this might be for you, CJ, as well, but others can obviously weigh in as well. But you mentioned using a cloud process for running the model. Can you explain more about that approach? For example, how is the model set up? What kind of resources and infrastructure are used? And how are results accessed or managed in the cloud environment? Just
our models,
a real softball question for you there.
Yeah. Our models have been built in PC Swim using the modified green ant parameters. We have modeled everything 24-inch pipes and larger in the model at this point in time. The major ditches, the canals, the ponds, the lakes that are in the city. We are the actual running it in the cloud. I'm gonna have to defer to somebody at Arcadis because I'm not the one actually running it in the cloud. They are. So I will defer to maybe Mike can weigh in on that. Or
Mike, do you want to take a stab at that?
It's probably actually more a Fernando question, honestly, on the guts of that one.
The question is, you mentioned using cloud process for running the model. Could you please explain? Could you please explain more about that approach? So we have a digital twin that we have created. It resides in the Azure platform from Arcadis that runs it, and that's how it is structured. It's a decision support tool that runs in the cloud, with the model being just one component. But the database and the data that you heard CJ describe is coming in being gathered by our platform, and the platform also links the model, and that's how the results are displayed right now for city use. But eventually there may be a potential for an application for the public to see some of the dashboards, like CJ mentioned. Hopefully that responds to your question.
Oh, that's great. No, thank you. Another question coming in having to do with tying this to the National Flood Insurance Program. Do any of the panelists integrate NFIP, National Flood Insurance Program, flood data into what you're doing in your community? So that, I think, speaks to kind of data integration types of questions. So anybody, let me throw this to let's go to Craig again. See what Craig, do you want to comment
or
on
Andrea?
that?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So could you repeat kind of the essence of the question?
Yeah, the essence of the question really is around the use of National Flood Insurance Protection program flood data into what you're doing with communities.
Oh, absolutely. That leads specifically to part of our planning effort. One of the major components of of planning is addressing some of the flooding that we're seeing in our community. So we do use the NFIP information, and we do integrate NFIP in a lot of what we do. So yes, that is a big part of our planning effort.
Awesome. And another question, anybody else? Andrew, do you want to get in and answer that one?
No, I would certainly echo Craig's comments. We certainly use it to evaluate flood risk. What we have found is a couple of things. A lot of the data has not been updated to account for development within the last couple of decades. At least that's how it is in Georgia. And so, quite honestly, a lot of times the data is a little bit archaic. However, what we have done is where we do have flooding issues within those areas that FEMA has identified, we attempt to, in many cases, we've been able to actually do acquisitions And there are some things that probably never should have been permitted to be built. For example, we have acquired single-family residential structures that in today's permitting standards would have never been permitted in the past. And also, those type projects make you eligible for a lot of the hazard mitigation funds and grant programs that FEMA offers. Unfortunately, I don't have one that I can celebrate that we've been able to obtain yet, but the team at Arcadis is constantly helping us evaluate those in our projects list to see which projects would be eligible for those funds.
Can I just add one more thing?
Yeah, please, Nikki, please.
I just wanted to say, so our flood maps, we're trying to improve upon FEMA's maps by assessing the risk of compound flooding. So whereas, FEMA would typically consider mostly like coastal, we're trying to also project sea level change and changing climate patterns. So trying to compare how a large intensity storm combined with the worst case sea level rise would change the flood risk areas across the city.
Yeah, I think that really goes back to your comments previously about how granular and highly localized the mapping is, and really the need to maybe even go beyond what is provided on that federal level.
Yeah.
And really dial it in. One more question we have time for, which I think is a fascinating one. Is it correct that there are no federal requirements to control local or pluvial flooding, like EPA's requirements to control water pollution under the MS4 program? So, Mickey, I'll kick this one over to you. My understanding is that this is not, the flood aspect is not a regulatory driver. It's something that's more coming from community need. But can you comment on that?
Yeah, we certainly are not doing anything towards regulatory compliance in terms of flood mitigation. That being said, our local city council is, they're updating a lot of things about what types of buildings are going to be allowed, taking into account the increasing flood risks. So I don't think we're going to be completely separate moving forward. But the green infrastructure we're building out now is to meet the water quality requirements. But there is definitely a lot of support and stakeholder pressure to really get the city up to speed on being resilient.
That's great, Mickey. Thanks. And it's really a blend of those two approaches, the regulatory and the community driven, or really the demands from the community to address and solve flooding problems. At this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Mike DeVono with some closing thoughts and to wrap up our hour. Mike?
Great. Thanks. Thank you, Shandor. And thank you, everyone, for your engagement and thoughtful questions throughout today's session. We've covered a lot of ground in the past hour, from the fundamentals of stormwater master planning and community engagement to the latest in flood resilience strategies, and finally, how we measure the real impact of our flood mitigation efforts in urban environments. We heard from Craig and Andrew about the importance of building broad support across community members, elected officials, and our staff to turn ambitious watershed plans into real on-ground action plans. CJ reinforced the value of blending infrastructure upgrades with innovative digital tools and nature-based solutions, emphasizing that resilience requires both technical excellence and adaptability. Mickey shared practical approaches for evaluating what works, highlighting how the right data, technology, and metrics can help us demonstrate progress and guide future investments. Thank you to everyone who participated in the audience polls. Your input on the biggest challenges and most promising strategies underscores how important collaboration, funding, and innovation are to this work. I'd like to extend special thank you to all of our panelists, Craig, Andrew, CJ, and Mickey, for sharing your expertise and real-world experiences. And thank you to our moderators, Fernando and Shandor, for guiding today's discussion. As we look ahead, let's continue this conversation and look for ways to apply these lessons in our own communities and projects. Collaboration across disciplines, organizations, and sectors will be key to building resilient, sustainable communities that can adapt to future challenges. If you have further questions or want to connect with any of our speakers, please let us know. We'll be sharing these resources and recap of today's session. On your screen right now, you'll see a QR code that if you would like to connect with any of our moderators or our panelists, and where you can leave some feedback for today's session. Thank you for joining, and have a great day.